need you to have it on. Can everybody hear me now? Well, my name is John Campbell, and I'm first, welcome to our Men's Fellowship program. I'm covering for Jack Miyamoto, who's the chair of our program. He's off on a medical appointment, and Pastor Ed Brandt was going to introduce our guest speaker, but he's on a medical appointment. So, you know, you move to Marco and retire, and it's all you have is medical appointments, it seems. Anyways, we have a great men's fellowship program this year. Before I get into today's, we have 3 more coming up after today. Second Wednesday of February, March, and April. We have Rabbi Larry Bazar talking about the current situation in the Middle East. He's a great speaker. It should be a great program. We have our own Marty Rowland, who's going to talk about the Zionist movement, the beginnings of it, and the impact on it, and how it relates to what's happening in the Middle East today even. And we have the final program, Down Goes the Iguana, with John Johnson, who's removed over 1,000 iguanas from Marco Island. He brings his equipment in, and he does a great job. Anyways, today's speaker is no stranger to United Church in Marco Island because he's done services here for the past 2 years, covering for Pastor Ed. He's a retired Episcopal priest. He's a retired Army colonel who served as the command chaplain of the Florida National Guard for a number of years. He's witnessed, studied, and experienced the good, bad, and ugly related to the steady decline of mainline Protestant churches in the United States. Today's presentation, with the film classic The Wizard of Oz as a framework, is going to highlight the steady decline and, more importantly, ways to reimagine the mission and ministry of a mainline congregational church. So with that, please welcome Reverend Dr. Tony Clark.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, Tony.
Appreciate you. Thank you to the Men's Fellowship for the invite to be here today. I truly appreciate it, just as much as I enjoy being with you on Sunday mornings. And all of my medical appointments were yesterday, so that I could be here today. And to get us started, and John hit a bit of this already, is a bit about me and my background, over 25 years, congregational ministry in the Episcopal Church. And yes, the Episcopal Church, as you will see, is one of those declining mainline Protestant denominations. I served in a mission church that then became a parish church, average Sunday attendance moving from about 75 up to about 150 or so. I've served in a congregation that had an average Sunday attendance of about 175 on a steady basis, also in a congregation that was upwards to 225, and a congregation that was over 400. So I have seen the various sizes and styles within the Episcopal Church, and I saw up close and personal the challenges that came with that decline. More on that in just a minute. Besides that work, my side hustle was with the Florida Army National Guard. I started as a battalion chaplain in a Special Forces unit and retired as the command chaplain for the Florida National Guard. Once again, over 25 years. And even within that context, I saw the decline of the mainline Protestant denominations. And I saw that decline in the sense of who are we bringing in as new chaplains? When I came into the Florida National Guard, 90% of the chaplains were from mainline Protestant denominations. When I left 25 years later, there was one remaining after I left. And so the decline of the mainline Protestant denominations is mirrored, if you will, in your chaplain corps. Now, that, in a sense, can be a completely separate topic. And remember, I saw it from a very small framework, whereas Ed, who served on a much broader level, would have seen that in a much different framework. But that is my background as far as congregational ministry, as far as ministry within the military. And from an academic, professional perspective, I earned a Doctor of Ministry in 2020. That time of study was upwards to 6 years. It was with, at that time, Trinity School for Ministry. They're now known as the Trinity Anglican Seminary. That's in Ambridge, PA, near Pittsburgh. I did in-person classes. I did independent studies. I did a thesis project, and all of the work that I did would touch on a number of the points that we'll talk about today. And so that is my background, and it's also my interest in this whole notion of, yes, there is a decline, but there are exceptions to the rule. Always keep that in mind. I saw it within the Episcopal Church. I have seen it within other mainline Protestant denominations. The general does not have to be the specific. So this is basically what we will talk about, what we'll look at for today. And I've bolded this simply because, in my mind, that's the most important part of this. We can identify who they are. We can identify some of the reasons for the decline. But more importantly, I want to talk about, here are ways that the decline doesn't have to happen in a congregation. And to begin, if you all will join me in prayer, we'll pray this prayer for cities, towns, and communities. So we'll pray together. Heavenly Father, you sent your Son among us to proclaim the kingdom of God in cities, towns, villages, and lonely places. Behold and visit, we pray, the city of Marco Island and its neighboring communities. Renew the bonds of charity that uphold our civic life. Send us honest and able leaders. Deliver us from poverty, prejudice, and oppression, that peace may prevail with righteousness and justice with mercy. And at last, bring us to your holy city, the New Jerusalem, where we shall know perfect unity and peace through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. So these are some scriptural points of reference for you that have been important for me in talking about decline of main lines and what shall we do now. 3 separate scripture verses, a place to hang your hat, so to speak. And then also, these have been 3 significant resources, inspiration, if you will, about the whole topic. And they're probably names that you don't recognize. And that's okay, because I didn't either. Bishop Leslie Newbigin might be one of the best kept secrets of the 20th century as it relates to the Western church and Western culture and society. Widely published, great writer. He writes both on an academic level, and he also writes for, let's face it, for the rest of us. Dr. Tim Keller, pastor in New York for many years, and his focus was on how is the church, the local congregation, connected to the city. And then finally, a larger resource, it's called the Trinity Forum. They're an organization out of New York, and their whole purpose is to equip, enable, encourage lay members of the church to engage our current culture, our current society. And they have a number of different resources I'm going to step outside of the camera view for everybody who's watching the recording. Number of resources. There are small books, there's small readings, and at the back of the books, at the back of the readings, there are discussion questions. I've used them within a congregation for studies. And they have a very large portfolio of these different books, these different studies. So, as I said, I brought some resources along with me. Those of you who are interested, you're welcome to check them out later. Happy to talk with you about them or any other resources that you might find helpful. So these are just points of reference, places to hang your hat, and the 3 resources that for me have been most important in my study, and not only my study, but my work in a congregation on these topics. And I have worked these in a congregation. So these are the 7 sisters of the Mainline. These are your mainline Protestant denominations, okay? And they're generally in order as far as their relative size. And you can see who is on the list. And right there. So in a sense, I can stop right now and simply say, yes, there has been steady decline since the 1960s within the Protestant mainline denominations. Now, if you're really interested in the widgets and the details on that, you can go online, go to your favorite search engine, and you can find out all sorts of information about each one of those denominations year to year. So if that is of interest to you, I commend that to you if you want to do research on a particular denomination and their numbers up or down. I can say for all 7 of those, steady decline since the 1960s. And we'll take a look at some of what we'll call the presenting symptoms. That's like for me yesterday when I go into my doctor's appointment, it's like, okay, doc, I've got congestion in my head, I've got a runny nose, my throat's a little raspy. Okay, let me listen to your lungs. Okay, you've got a little bit of buildup in your lungs as well. So that's all the presenting symptoms. So when we talk about, well, why are the main lines declining? These are the tip of the iceberg, if you will, reasons for the decline. And most of us might be able to look up there and go, yep, that makes sense. Yep, makes sense there. You've got lower birth rates within these denominations, which means we're quite simply not replacing each other through birth. And related to that is the generational retention. And that's all about what the Church of England calls the rebound effect. And within mainline denominations, that was how we did church growth. Our kids would be in Sunday school, they would be in youth group, they would go off to college, they wouldn't go to church in college, but that's okay because we knew they would come back to the church, right? That's how it worked. Notice past tense, that's how it worked. We're not getting that bounce back, that rebound, where our kids, and for me, I am the latest in the baby boomer generation. All right, baby boomer generation goes up to 1964. I was born in 61. My hunch is most all of us in here are boomers, somewhere on the boomer scale, maybe some earlier, I don't know. But within that boomer generation, yes, we were in church, but guess what? Not so much our kids. And if not our kids, then probably not our grandkids. So that's where that low generational retention comes in. Right here. Nowadays, it's not as important to maintain loyalty to my denomination. I remember way back when, early 90s, I'm a lifelong Episcopalian. All right? Those numbers of lifers declining year by year. Because people, and we'll talk about some of the reasons why, people don't necessarily have brand loyalty. I remember in downtown Orlando, it was pretty much, I was at the Cathedral Church of St. Luke, and there was a pretty regular rotation between Cathedral Church of St. Luke, Episcopal, First Pres downtown, First Presbyterian, and First Methodist downtown. And then we lather, rinse, and repeat, just rotating among primarily those three downtown congregations, depending on the pastor, the programming, the preaching, fill in the blank. But there wasn't that sense of, oh, I need to stay at this church because this is my denomination. That has waned. I can speak for a whole nother session on what went on and still goes on within the Episcopal Church. In the 1970s, it was women's ordination, and it was a new prayer book. And those created splinter churches. I got to keep my alphabet soup together here. We got your Reformed Episcopal Church, REC, and we also got Anglican Church of America, ACA, and the AAC, American Anglican Church. We got those three out of the 1970s splits. All right? Fast forward into the 2000s, it had shifted from new prayer book, women's ordination, to now to human sexuality. And out of the human sexuality, and I dealt with that on the national level. I was part of the conversations at the national level. Out of that, we were able to break off two more denominations, AMIA, Anglican Mission in America, and ACNA, Anglican Church in North America. So that is all just within the Episcopal Church. Those splits and shifts over a number of different issues. And for some people, they left the Episcopal Church because I'm moving off to another one of the splinter groups. Or others said, I'm just going to another denomination because I'm tired of this nonsense. But it led to decline overall. And I know other traditions. I know the Methodist Church, I know the Presbyterian Church have had similar roils and issues over the years. Financial strains, it just costs more to do church than it did 5 years ago, than it did 10 years ago, than it did 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And the small congregation finds it much more difficult just to maintain the basics. And now you hear, and this has been going on for several years now, where either congregations are closing, experienced that while I was in Central Florida. Congregations close because the numbers in the congregation can't support even a part-time priest, can't pay the bills to keep lights on, can't repair the building. And so you close churches, you merge or consolidate churches. Some churches, they remain open, but they have a priest that's over 4 or 5 different congregations. In the Episcopal Church, we have dioceses that in the 1950s and 60s were splitting up, are now coming back together again. They realize, oh, we don't need an Eastern Michigan and a Western Michigan. We can just do with Michigan. Because the two dioceses could no longer be self-supporting. So the financial struggles have played into it as far as the decline. And finally, non-denominational congregations. Those have been a landing place for many out of mainline denominations. That is just the reality. So, as I said, these are presenting symptoms, tip of the iceberg, but wait, there's more, because there is something much deeper going on, and that's where we shift to the movie The Wizard of Oz. And yes, we are off to see The Wizard, and I use The Wizard of Oz as a framework to understand what has happened, not just since the 60s, but from the 1700s. All right? And here's, as far as the movie is concerned, here's your characters. There's the 7 sisters of the Mainline. Think of them as Dorothy. Kansas, those are the good old days, and the good old days are relative, I know that, but the good old days are, for us within the Mainline traditions, is, 50s, 60s, maybe early 70s. Those were the, as one colleague once said, the halcyon days of the Episcopal Church. The glory days, if you will. And then Oz, which, oh, by the way, is where we now minister. That is 21st century society, the land of Oz, and then you have the Twister. And the Twister is how Dorothy goes from Kansas into Oz. The Twister is how we, as the Mainline, suddenly find ourselves in 21st century society. And 21st century society is not Kansas. So it's true, Toto, we are not in Kansas anymore. I'll stop right there and see what questions you might have. Yes, sir, I see that hand.
Yeah, I understand that the Catholic churches and evangelical churches are also showing decline, maybe not to the same level.
Okay.
I don't know if that's...
I wasn't researching that, so, but I know even within, when we talk about evangelical, that tends to be more of the non-denominationals, and yes, they have had decline also. It might be fair to say that, Christianity as we understand it is in a decline, all right? Now, once again, I would have to go back to the Google and other search engines to really dial down on that. And part of that is just simply whether you're a mainline church or an evangelical church or Roman Catholic, you're not in Kansas anymore, you are in Oz. And if you remember the movie, Oz was a little bit different than Kansas. The movie starts out in black and white, right? And then it shifts to color when Dorothy opens the screen door. And that, by the way, is where my mother ran screaming out of the theater as a kid, because she'd never seen Technicolor before. Yeah. Yes, sir. I got your hand. Yeah.
Yeah, I have belonged to a couple of large evangelical churches, and most of their new attendees and members have come from mainline denominations. So I think what he brings up is true, that there is something going on theologically that even goes beyond the LGBTQ issues, that is moving people out of what they perceive to be less orthodox, if you will, and into churches that they perceive to be more orthodox.
I would agree with you, and I think that goes back to this internal theological shifts, splits, and schisms, in the sense of, I think it is fair to say that since the 1960s, your mainline churches have become more progressive, all right? And I know that just from the Episcopal Church on a national level, and what I often saw was what was going on the national level didn't quite match up what was going on a congregational level. And so I would agree with you. The part of that, of the departures, are because of those theological shifts as well. Let me get this hand right here, and then I'm going to press on so that we can stay sort of on time. Yes, sir.
Were any of these same factors involved in the mergers of church, like when the Evangelical Reformed Church and the where there are some of these same factors at play?
Perhaps. I can't speak to that, not being from the congregational world. So I don't know in a sense, the pedigree or how these different churches merged with others. About all I could speak of with any type of authority, I use that term very loosely, would be from the Episcopal perspective. Yeah, so I know there were some other hands, so hold on to those. We'll take a break for questions, but I want to get us moving along here. So we know the Wizard of Oz is going to be our framework just for looking at why is the world so different. And so first of all, we talk about life in Kansas. And one of the fancy intellectual terms was what we knew as functional Christendom. And you can see what that is. There was an underlying Judeo-Christian worldview that was accepted within society and within culture. It was accepted that there would be a prayer before fill in the blank. A prayer before a civic occasion, before a sporting event, before fill in the blank. No one questioned that because religion as a matter of culture. Religion and culture, and I understand here in the United States, the church is separate from the state. At the same time, they had a good relationship. A good relationship in that the church basically signed up to help produce good citizens for society. That was part of our work. And the state, well, they helped support that. Anybody else remember blue laws? Okay. Why did we have blue laws? Because the Sabbath, Sunday, is holy. We can't have people shopping or drinking or fill in the blank. I remember growing up, there were no youth sports on Sunday or Wednesday afternoons and evenings. Okay? Now, that was an agreement, if you will. The society and the culture said, we're not going to step into that world. Do you know who first stepped into that world? The NFL. Because when did the NFL schedule games? Okay? That was a first step towards erosion of what we'll call the blue laws or common values and norms. And when we talk about blue laws, I know that there were blue laws on the books. And I remember someone once asking, why can't I buy a beer on a Sunday? Oh, because other people are in church. Makes sense. So we know some blue laws were on the books, other blue laws were more informal, however you might interpret that. Publix, for example, never open on Sunday. All right? My dad worked for Publix. I worked for Publix. We both started working with Publix because we knew we would always have Sunday off. Until one day, Mr. Jenkins was in a Winn-Dixie on a Sunday getting a half gallon of milk, and he's in line with the woman. She doesn't know who he is, and she's just commenting and just says in passing, I just think it's lovely that Publix is closed on Sunday, with her full basket of groceries. And that's when Mr. Jenkins realized we may need to change our business model. All right? So this was a matter of common values, common norms. This is in Kansas, okay? And for the church, for church growth, our motto was the movie Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. Which is all we had to do after World War II. The GIs come back from the Pacific or back from Europe, and they're now starting to settle in and settle down. And so all we had to do was build a church, hang up a shingle, open the doors, And people knew this is what we do on Sundays. So the Field of Dreams method of church growth and church planting worked. And also, that's back to that returners, because at that time, yes, kids would leave when they were in college, but they came back. And so that's how we kept it going. And then if you were in a mainline congregation, well, evangelism, as far as asking someone, do you have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, that was unnecessary. And we really didn't need to invite anyone to church, right? As I had someone tell me once, this was in the 90s, well, if they were supposed to be Episcopalians, they already would be. Right? So that was, and once again, I know I'm speaking in generalities. That's really about the best we can do today, is in general. But just think about it. Field of Dreams was how the Seven Sisters of the Mainline operated. If you build it, they will come. Because that's basically what society encouraged. One last story, then we'll move on. Growing up in Jacksonville, Florida, this is in the 1970s, early 80s. If you wanted to be elected to any citywide office, you had to be the member of one of two churches. You had to be a member of St. John's Episcopal Cathedral or First Baptist Downtown. And on your campaign literature, that was proudly displayed that you were a member of one of those two churches. Why? Well, that was just the expectation. Society expected you to have those good values from those good downtown congregations. And so, why did we join certain churches? Well, because there's a certain social standing that goes with that. That was part of living, that was part of church in Kansas. However, you remember the movie? Well, it's a twister. It's a twister. And unlike the twister in the movie, the one to which I'm referring has been a slow-moving twister. And as I said, it goes back late 17th to 18th century. That's how long ago the twister started affecting our society and our culture. And for most of it, because it's been slow moving, we really haven't noticed it. And we're talking about the Enlightenment, known as the Age of Reason, and I know that I am skipping over hundreds of years of world history here. I am skipping over hundreds of significant names. I get that. This is just once over lightly, broad brushstrokes. Remember, it was the Age of Reason. Got to use our heads here. We put a value on reason, on autonomy, the individual. And also, from that time came our scientific method. Now, is the scientific method a bad thing? No, it's pretty darn helpful. But take that science point of view and now start applying that to Holy Scripture, and you get Jefferson's Bible. Thomas Jefferson, in a sense, edited his own Bible, and he edited it by simply excising all the miraculous references. Why? Well, didn't meet the scientific method. And this is where we began to question. Some of y'all might see a bumper sticker, question authority. Part of the Enlightenment thought. And so we questioned our traditions, our authority, and our truth claims. That started with the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment came right after a number of wars of religion. Once again, hundreds of years here, number of different countries. But the wars of religion didn't solve anything. And so people began to say, wait a minute, religion can't get it right. Maybe there's another way that we can truly affect human progress and beyond. And this starts moving us into that 60s and beyond time period. Everything in life became voluntary association. You choose to sign up with a church. You choose to sign up with a Rotary Club. You choose to join this club. It's voluntary association. You've also got consumerism. Once again, that's a whole nother topic. If you ever want me back down for some other teaching, we can just talk about how consumerism affects all of us. And so consumerism starts playing into the notion of church shopping. Well, I'm really not being fed in this congregation. And hey, I've heard this, folks, okay? I'm really not being fed by your preaching, or I'm not being fed by the programs here. Okay, well, what do? I'm going to go shop for another congregation, another church. And why? Well, that's okay. It's what we do in our modern world. How many different restaurants do you have on the island? A lot, right? A lot to choose from. We're down here to choice. Religion has morphed from being a matter of culture. It was just assumed that you would be in church on Sunday. Right? Those of you who grew up, baby boomer generation, it was just assumed that's where you were. And if you weren't, whoa. Matter of culture, it is now a matter of choice. What else can you do on Marco Island besides church on a Sunday morning?
Beach,
Yep, golf, beach, fish.
watch the NFL.
Watch the NFL. Oh, we got the NFL Europe now at, what, 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning?
I don't know.
Exactly. Or if you follow the Premier League, you've got Premier League games starting at 7 a.m., 8 a.m. on Sunday mornings. So there's a lot for people to do on a Sunday morning that wasn't around 60s or 70s. And since we are now all consumers and we make choices about what we buy, okay, I choose to buy the beach rather than church. Or I choose to buy a round of golf rather than church. And from a societal perspective, that's okay. So aligning with a congregation is now a much more voluntary effort. So as a side note, I would keep that in mind. Anytime somebody's visiting you, they're making a conscious choice to almost go against the tide, to go against cultural norms, if you will. In the sense of, our culture says you don't need to do that. There's so much else you can do. I'll stop here. Questions? Everybody tracking so far? Looks like everybody's still awake, unless you're really good at sleeping with your eyes open, for which I commend you. So that is the twister. Okay? And as I said, this covered 20 pages of a paper. All of this. All right? So I've condensed 20 pages into this. All right? It's very general. I know that. But it's just understand, this is what started in the Enlightenment, and this is what we now know, at least in more current American life. Oh, and by the way, I don't even need to go to church on Sunday. Right? I might want to go to church, but I don't need to because of technology. All right, it used to be on the TV only. But now, guess what? I can stream it. Now, I know during COVID we had to do that, or we were told we had to do that. At least that was my life in Southeast Texas. And what about the bounce after that? Did congregations see declines in attendance after COVID? Yes. I can only speak anecdotally, but I heard enough people tell me, I really got used to watching church in pajamas with my morning coffee. So technology is part of it. So, And from the Enlightenment, from what we have in our modern world, from that twister, and this is Leslie Newbigin right here, this is how many people in our current society, our current culture, view our life. And Leslie Newbigin would say that from the Enlightenment and beyond, we have created this huge divide, a huge divide between what we consider to be public and private. And you can see what is over on the public side. You can see what's on the private side. And so, from a public perspective, that's what we do Monday through Friday. And then that's your public life. And then your Sunday life is, oh, that's in church, right? That's your personal life. All right? Because we're supposed to keep our faith personal, right? Well, that's your personal beliefs. Okay, you're right. They are. Leslie Newbigin would say, if the Bible's not true for everyone, or if the Christian story is not true for everyone, then it's not true for anyone. But that's a whole other study in Leslie Newbigin. But you can see this is the divide we now have in our world. And if we're all on, at least if I am honest, yeah, I have that divide in myself as well. And part of this moving forward is, how do we integrate that? How do we integrate what we would consider to be public with private? Oops, I just killed it. Public and private. How do we integrate Monday to Friday with Sunday? And that was really the thesis of my final project for my Doctor of Ministry, was that integration of Monday and Friday with Sunday. Because I found through research, that integration was lacking within Episcopal congregations. We hadn't taught people or helped people learn how to do that. And how do we integrate the public square with, we'll say the private square, which is your house. So that is the divide we find ourselves with here in Oz. So, bad news, with my apologies to Don Henley. There are no ruby slippers for the mainline denominations. We are not going back to Kansas. All right? And I learned over time that is really a moment to pause, because for many of us, that is a significant loss. Because, at least from my perspective, I learned how to be a pastor. I was trained for congregations in Kansas. That was my world. Field of Dreams, Kansas, the good old days. And over time, I realized we're not in Kansas anymore, and that we're also not going to be able to go back. And just think about it for Dorothy. If the movie had had a different ending, yeah, she was fortunate. She had those ruby slippers. No place like home. No place like home. And magically, we don't have any ruby slippers, folks. We are not going back to Kansas. And so now we have to make truly a significant choice here is, what will we do here in Oz? What will we do as far as mainline denominations? And don't think just on the denominational level, but on a congregational level and on a personal individual level. What do you do here in Oz? And there is good news. As Yogi Berra would say, it's deja vu all over again. Because we have seen this movie. Not we as the ones who are sitting in this room, but we as the church. Because you go back to ancient Rome and to the beginnings of what we know as the Christian way, Ancient Rome, multicultural, multi-philosophical. We were just one of many different ways of life in ancient Rome. And even in ancient Rome, the church had to deal with Mrs. Gulch, had to deal with a wicked witch, and had to deal with flying monkeys. In other words, tormentors. Those who would seek to see that infant church eliminated. But also remember, at that time, we weren't the darlings of the empire. That happened when Constantine became emperor, around, I think it was 313, if I can remember my church history. Constantine becomes emperor, it changes. Christianity now becomes essentially the state religion. But before that, they were hard times for the church. It was Oz. So in one sense, we've gone from Oz to Kansas, back to Oz. Now, modern day Oz might look a little bit different than ancient Oz. Then again, it may not if you start doing some comparison, but that's a whole nother teaching. So just keep in mind, this is not new for us. We've seen this movie, not personally, but corporately as a church. There's some memory within the church, capital C, universal, on all of this. So, now we're back. All right, Tony, it's great that you told us who these 7 sisters are, that there's been significant decline. We have talked about some of those presenting issues, presenting symptoms. We've talked about that twister going from the Enlightenment to today. We know we don't have ruby slippers, so what now? That's what's next, is the what now. And it is, for many of us, and I speak for myself here, it became a reimagination of what we are as a church and what I am as a believer. It has a corporate dimension, but it also has an individual dimension. And I had to learn this. Remember, I was trained for Kansas. I was trained watching the movie Field of Dreams. And all of a sudden, you've put me in Oz without a blueprint, without a template. So we've learned. We have learned. And, you know, we hear the notion of profanity. The Latin profane is all about the city, outside the city gates. We are called to be profane, not necessarily outside the city gates, but to be outside the 4 walls of a congregation. To be outside the congregation. That's where I'm moving, all right? And the fancy theological term is Missio Dei, mission of God. And if you were to Google missional church, you would find a lot. And missional church is an outward focus. To use some science examples here, it's centripetal versus centrifugal. Centripetal draws in. That is Field of Dreams. Where, okay, everybody comes to church. That's the whole plan. You come to church on Sunday. All right? Centrifugal is now the notion of the church going out. And I think I may have shared this with some of y'all before, but in my days at the cathedral, they loved incense. All right, if any of you are from a Roman tradition, you may know what I'm talking about here. You had a bowl on the end of a chain, and you'd light the incense, and you'd get the smoke going, all right? And I used to love taking that thurible and then spinning it around my head. Yeah, that's usually the look that I got from the congregation too, was like, what? And that was just to explain centrifugal. Because the whole point was, I am spinning this over my head. What happens if I let it go? Is that it just flies out. So there's this notion of an outward movement. Borrowing from John's gospel, Jesus tells his disciples, I have been sent, I am now sending you. So that's why I gave that as one of those reference scriptures early on. And in Kansas, that was our movie, right? In Oz, we need a different movie. We have to have a different movie to understand this notion of, all right, we have to be moving out. And that's where the movie The Hobbit, Unexpected Journey, and the words of Gandalf, home is now behind you, Kansas is now behind you, the world, Oz, is now ahead. And I wanted to check an idea that I had, so I was in y'all's Mayflower room, okay? Mayflower room, I find this replica of the Mayflower, okay? The symbol of the Congregational Church. The Congregational Church has roots in people who were sent. Puritans, pilgrims, leaving England to come to the New World. So that, as you're thinking about this whole notion of missional, well, what's missional got to do with us? Well, in UCC, in my mind, remember, I don't have UCC roots, but in my mind, from a UCC perspective, that symbol of the Mayflower is a powerful symbol for the notion of missional ministry and movement. Within my tradition, the Anglican tradition, I have St. Patrick. I have Thomas of Canterbury. I have James de Coven, who went from New York City to the Midwest when the Midwest was truly frontier. So I think all of our traditions have got that symbol where home is now behind you. And I think for the Puritans and the Pilgrims, they understood that. That's, home is behind us. We're now headed west. And so that's what I am talking about, and once again, covering this on a very broad level, the notion of a missional mindset. And a dimension of that missional mindset, it's only a dimension. Believe me, this can go in a number of different avenues and ways. Once again, another talk, another topic, another discussion. But it's the notion of borrowing from Jeremiah, and this is what Tim Keller's work was all about, is that whole notion of seeking the welfare of the city. Now, for Jeremiah, it was the exiles from Judah and Jerusalem. They were exiled in Babylon. Home was behind them. And so, what was the advice? Well, the advice to the Lord, to Jeremiah, to the people, the advice was, I need you to completely resist Babylon. I need you to have nothing to do with Babylon. I need you to build walls. I need you to set Babylon away, keep them away. Was that the advice? No. Seek the welfare of the city where I've sent you into exile. That's another image we can use here for the notion of the main lines being in Oz. We're exiles. We're exiles from heaven, first and foremost. That is our true home. And we're exiles in this merry old land of Oz. I want you to seek the welfare, and because in its welfare, you will find your welfare. You seek the welfare of that city, that then blesses you. You bless the city, that blessing blesses you as well. And right here, this is your Old Testament hook. Here's your New Testament hook out of 1 Peter. And keep in mind, welfare is one of the English words that we use to translate shalom. All right? And most people, if I ask, well, what does shalom mean? Oh, it means peace. Yes, and shalom is one of those big words for which there's not really a good English translation for. It's too big. So we get welfare, wholeness, soundness, flourishing, a condition in which nothing is lacking. That's a big word, all right? And it involves spiritual, it involves physical, it involves mental, moving beyond. It's economics, it's politics, it's entertainment, it's fill in the blank. The shalom. And so a question I thought of, and we're not answering this today, but this is just for your own conversation moving forward, is where is the shalom, the wholeness, the soundness, the flourishing of Marco Island lacking? And if you're not sure, that's okay. That's part of the fun of all of this, is you get to do some exploring and some investigating. That's what we had to do in Orlando when we started asking questions like this. So just to talk about the life in a missional congregation, in one sense, it still includes centripetal. It still includes gathering. And your gathering is your worship and your formation. It's your administration. It's I'll say the churchy things that we do on Sunday mornings or sometimes during the week, okay? And these are all good things. This is Leslie Newbegin as it relates to our gathering, and especially to our worship, because we have to remember the grand story that we know as the Christian saga is no longer well known within our society or in our culture. It's not. It's also not the meta-narrative, the grand narrative that used to cover all of life. And so when we gather for worship, when we gather for formation, we need to constantly remind ourselves of that grand story. That's what our worship is intended to do, is to rehearse that Sunday after Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. Because remember, we have spent Monday through Friday in Oz, right, folks? And we know that Oz is very different norms, very different values. And so we have to gather on Sundays to rehearse the story, to rehear the story. And so that's where worship and formation, the gathering, is so important. It is so important because that's how we maintain our bearings. Because otherwise, our identity is shaped by the culture. So which story do we choose? Biblical story, cultural story. And then, in true Waffle House style, you have the scattering. And the scattering is for our service. We scatter from the church after we have been encouraged, we've been enabled, we've been equipped. We now scatter for service. Gathering, scattering. Tide comes in, tide goes out. Whatever image works for you. Ebb, flow. Now we talk about corporate service, and that's where United Church goes as a group to serve. If I remember looking at your website, you have several instances where you go to, I think, some food banks, and you serve meals. Any heads going north and south? Okay, thank you, all right? So that is corporate service. That, in a sense, United Church, we put our polos on, we all go out together as a group to serve. Great. Please keep doing that, all right? That's important. These statements or questions are from a missional church survey. And once again, this is food for thought as far as a formal method of discovering the needs of the community. In other words, there's some thought behind it. There's some analysis. There's some investigating about Marco Island. And to be honest with you, I don't know a lot about Marco. It seems to have a significant tourist industry. Is that fairly accurate? Okay, a couple heads going north and south. Significant tourist industry. Do you have schools? Okay, we have schools. We have hospitals.
Off the island.
Hospitals off the island. Interesting. Naples. So, huh?
And no ambulance service, which is unusual
Interesting.
Yes, it's very, very weird.
Interesting. Wow. I wonder what it would look like to bring an ambulance service on the island.
You think it'd be natural, or
You'd think, but so that's the thinking that you can have along the lines of, okay, we know we've got X, Y, and Z, but we're missing this. And all the schools are well staffed with mentors and volunteers, right? Some? Okay. Okay. So, and also, we regularly discuss the spiritual needs of people living within our community. Well, do we know the spiritual needs of the people living in our community? It's okay to say not really, because we had the same question in Orlando. Well, we know what we want. We know what we need. And of course, what we need is what they need, right? Okay? I mean, that's like, that was how we did mission work for so long, was we go to the third world country and we paint a school because we know that's what they need. And then when we stop and we pause and we sit down with the leaders of that town and go, we've noticed that we come down and paint the school, and then another group comes behind us a few months later, repaints the school. Do y'all really need the school painted? Well, no, not really, but we thought that that's what y'all really enjoyed to do, so we just let you do that. I had that conversation. I sat in on that conversation. All right? So this is about, if we're going to scatter, we'll say faithfully. If we're going to scatter faithfully, let's scatter in ways that can make a difference in our community. And please, as I say this, keep in mind what you are doing right now, don't stop it, okay? Just the fact that you've got your thrift store, that in itself is a huge impact for your community. I know it helps the congregation with funding, but it helps the community for those who can't afford to buy other than in a thrift store. Okay? My daughter, 4 kids. Guess where she shops? Thrift stores. Because kids, they have this nasty habit of growing out of their clothes. So these are just statements or questions as we think about our corporate service. As, once again, think of corporate as the body, a group from United Church with our polos on, going out. Are we doing it effectively? Then individual service. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but it is important to keep in mind. And this is coming from New Begin and also Dorothy L. Sayers. Anybody familiar with Dorothy L. Sayers? No? Okay. English writer, detective stories. No? Oh, well, that's all right. She was a contemporary of C.S. Lewis. And so with Dorothy L. Sayers, one of her essays was Why Work? And in it, she brings up the whole point that the church has done a miserable job in supporting people in their daily work. All right? Now, my hunch is that since y'all are here on a Wednesday afternoon and that we've gone beyond your lunch hour by a few minutes, that y'all aren't working on the regular, okay? So you have to broaden the definition of work beyond just paid Monday through Friday. But where are you working? And when I say working, where are you volunteering? And so if we're using that, and I'm not talking about volunteering as part of the group of United Church, but this is just you in your world where you volunteer, okay? If I weren't working, still working, I would be volunteering, spending more time with the Florida State Golf Association as a rules official, okay? So how would the church support me in that effort? And from Dorothy L. Sayers' perspective, as well as from Leslie Newbegin's perspective, as well as Tim Keller's perspective and others, the church does not do a very good job of that, of supporting people in their daily life, in their daily work, or their daily life and volunteering, if you will. So this is Leslie Newbegin. Primary action, members in their daily work, their daily volunteering, whatever your work might be. And more from Newbegin, the opportunities for people who are involved in that daily work, whatever it might be. How are they getting feedback on that? How are they coming in? Do they have a small group where they can meet and say, hey, I've got this issue at work where I'm a volunteer and I work in the hospital gift shop, and I've got a supervisor who comes in on the regular and is taking money out of the cash register. And they just say, oh, don't worry about it, don't worry about it. I'm not really sure what to do about that. And you've got a group of peers that can help you reflect on that, gathering in the church. How do you proceed on that? I did do a small group like that, and this was in Southeast Texas. And it was all people who were involved in daily work where they could come and reflect on their jobs and get feedback from others who were working too and had struggles as far as, is that kosher? Is that ethical? How does that stand up? So that's the notion of individual service, and how is the church supporting that individual service for each one of us, and whatever that may be. And because we're all different, it's all going to look different. All right, so this is the wrap up here. That's a real bold statement on my part, right? Continued decline. And for me, this is y'all's question. And as I said at the beginning, I have seen exceptions to the rule. I have seen exceptions to the rule within denominations, particular congregations, bucked the trend. And people would look around going, what are they doing? Because the land of Oz is in trouble. You just have to watch the evening news. If you even watch the evening news, you can watch your news feed on your phone, okay? We know the world around us is in trouble. How do we, in our small way, and that's all it can be is a small way, how do we help the land of Oz? And the land of Oz may not even know it needs help. And finally, there are so many resources available. I brought some with. You're welcome to take a look at them. Welcome to talk about some of them. There's one resource from Episcopal Diocese of Texas that can be very helpful for a small group study as it relates to this whole notion of missional. Because let's face it, if you lived in Kansas, if you were trained in Kansas, talking about missional, it's foreign language. I get it. It was foreign language for me for a long time. And I still have to work learning it because Kansas was so ingrained in my training and how we did church. So those are three questions for your consideration. And here's where you get to ask some final questions. Yes, sir.
In the community I lived in for 48 years and in the community I'm in now, it seems that non-mainline churches, what we call pole-barn churches, that were put up in the middle of a field sometimes, and people drifted into those congregations from the mainline churches, and they're thriving. They're growing. Why?
Part of the reason, and I can give you part of it, okay? Part of the reason goes back to where we talked about the notion of consumerism. the notion of these non-denominational churches, or pole barn, all right? And in our case, what you usually see going up is, kind of like a big metal building. That's their first building. Or a shopping center, okay? Shopping center is a good place to start a church. But just a partial answer to your question, and it's related to that whole notion of consumerism, where we have become church consumers. And many of those non-denominational churches have done good analysis of their demographic, of their consumer, and they understand what their needs are. Let's see, I need a good children's program, right? Check the block. I need a good youth program, all right? Check the block. I need to have good relationship building activities within the congregation. And in most non-denominational churches, they are very intentional about forming small groups. And when you join one of those non-denominational churches, you are assigned to a small group. And that small group gathers other than Sunday morning. You're in a small group of about 12 people. Oh, and guess what you can do in that small group of about 12 people? You can talk about the problems you're having at work. Okay? So they've hit that relational side, and they've also, their worship, and this is where I have challenges, all right? Their worship, and I want to be careful here because I don't like the notion of bad talking anyone else who's preaching the gospel. And they do preach the gospel very clearly, in the sense of the importance of knowing Jesus and of walking with Jesus on a regular basis, all right? And their preaching tends to be engaging, all right? And their worship can seem a lot like entertainment, okay? Now, for me, coming out of the Episcopal Church, it doesn't work. That's me, okay? But they also know who they are drawing. Many of them they are drawing are rebelling against that style of worship. And that's why it works within the non-denominational setting. I can also say that Episcopal Cathedral, downtown, when people would talk about contemporary worship, I would always ask, okay, what's contemporary music for you? All right, and they would start telling me about songs from the 60s and 70s. I said, no, doesn't count. All right? Then you go to more contemporary music. In my view, much of contemporary music is not singable by a congregation. It's not designed for congregational singing. It's designed to listen to on the radio. All well and good. So, do you know what our contemporary music was? We took the old great hymns and we gave them a different sound. Different sound, as in not on the organ, a piano, or a guitar, or a piano and a guitar. And add some drums. Not rock and roll drums, more of a Celtic style. Is anyone familiar with the hymn, Be Thou My Vision? Be thou my vision, bum, 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 bum. Try listening to that with some drums in the background. It becomes very Celtic, which is what it's supposed to be. So that's how we created contemporary music, was we gave the great hymns, because the great hymns tell the story. The great hymns tell the story that we all need to hear and that the land of Oz needs to hear. But you take the great hymns and you reset them. Just give them a different sound. And part of that different sound just has to do with people today in the land of Oz generally don't listen to organ music on the regular. Right? So they come in, and if that's all they hear is organ, then all right. Now, once again, you asked about non-denoms. May have gone off the track there, but they're very popular because of they are meeting the felt needs of many out there, and they're meeting them very well. They're meeting them very well. And then it's also a challenge for many mainline churches because of the expenses to have that good children's ministry, all right, and it needs to be more than just someone sitting in a room in a rocking chair with kids on the floor, all right? Good youth ministry. You got to pay people, all right? Cost money. Then you start plugging in all these extra programs. It becomes expensive, and many typical mainline denomination congregations do not have the funds for all that. You know, y'all are blessed here that you've got such a large number of staff members. You really are. You know, considering many mainline denominations, you've got a pastor, and you're lucky if that pastor is full-time, and you've got a part-time secretary, and you've got a volunteer bookkeeper. Okay? So y'all are truly blessed with the staff that you have here. And because the staff gives you more opportunities to reach out. You know, and so you go scatter and you draw people in to gather, you've got the staff to be able to minister to that. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think that in Christianity, do you think the numbers are coming down, or do you think the mainline churches have come down, but the others have filled in gaps, and those numbers are the same or going up?
I will, as far as to give you a definitive answer on that, it would have to be I don't know, okay? My hunch is, all right, and this is just a hunch, that's all, is yes, main lines are declining, but the non-denominations are picking up some of that. I also know that we have more of a third column. They are the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, okay? Started seeing that on dog tags. Remember, I started in the 90s. I left towards the end, I left in 2018. You saw more and more on dog tags, none. No religious affiliation. Yep, none. So you've got the main lines, you've got the non-denoms, and then Roman Catholic Church is a whole separate category, all right? And I honestly can't give you hard numbers on their growth or decline. You've got Roman Catholic, non-denominational, main lines, nuns. And I can say that the nun population, N-O-N-E, is increasing, where people just don't have a religious affiliation. Unaffiliated, if you want to call it. All right, I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to go back to there. Yes, sir.
Just a comment, when I went through boot camp in 1960, we had 75 in our platoon. You had to go to church on Sunday, either Catholic or Protestant. I mean, I'm no question.
Yes.
About it, except we had one who said he was a Buddhist, and the DIs accepted that, but he was their house mouse. In other words,
Yeah.
he cleaned their barracks for the drill
Yep.
instructors while we went to church.
Yep, but no, that was, I can see that. You know, related to that whole decline of the main lines within, you know, military chaplain corps, and I tell you this anecdotally, all right, where after World War II, after World War II, moving into we'll say the 80s, the general Protestant service was morning prayer from the Episcopal prayer book. Why? Because you had a lot of Episcopal priests who were also serving as Army chaplains. And in my time, from the early 90s, late to 2018, 2020, I saw that decline within the Episcopal Church, just like that, where there are fewer and fewer Episcopal clergy who are going in. And so, and the non-denoms are replacing them, okay? Non-denoms are replacing them, so now the general Protestant service is a non-denominational service. So you're right, back in the 60s, 70s, yeah, everybody went to church, period, full stop. You don't like that trainee? Get down. All right, now we ready to go to church? Yes, Drill Sergeant. Yeah. All right, and we had one back there. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm involved with an Anglican Church of North America congregation in the Twin Cities, and it is growing rapidly. Started with nothing 10 years ago. And my inclination, well, there's that example. Then I also know that the Christian church, somebody asked, what's that happening globally? The Christian church is continuing to grow globally, but it's primarily in Africa and South America and third world developing countries, where it's primarily with Pentecostal denominations, charismatic denominations, not mainline denominations. The mainline church is basically out of the missionary work
Right.
when it comes to third world countries. But the evangelical world has continued that, and particularly the Pentecostal world. I used to be involved with a large food company that had multiple units, like McDonald's. It wasn't McDonald's. But one thing we did, and I would suggest this if you're thinking about doing another PhD study, is we did a study of which are the restaurants within this concept that are growing, both on the top line and the bottom line, and which are not. When you're in a multiple unit business, you can do that. And the church is a multiple unit enterprise, right? So you could look at what are, within the mainline denominations, which are the churches that really are outside the norm here, that are growing against the trend. What's unique about that? And my guess is that you find the primary differences are theological and the charismatic preaching quality of the pastor.
And I would agree with you in the sense of you look at Anglican Church North America, and I have a number of friends who moved to Anglican Church North America. And for us in our diocese around Greater Orlando, that was painful in the sense of, do I stay or do I go? Do I stay with the Episcopal Church? Do I go to Anglican Church North America or Anglican Mission in America, which morphed into ACNA? But yes, you're right. There are some very clear indicators of those churches that are, if you use the term successful or effective, there are some real clear indicators. And one of them is a very clear preaching of the gospel, all right? And also that preaching is well done. You don't have to be Billy Graham, all right? But you need to be able to serve a solid meal on a weekly basis to people. And so I would agree with you. My thought always was related to the Episcopal Church and comparing, with the notion of restaurants that get it right. I can go just about anywhere in the United States, and Chick-fil-A is always Chick-fil-A, right? Very consistent product. Very consistent product. Within the Episcopal Church, it varies from congregation to congregation, from priest to priest. So there wasn't a lot of consistent product being offered. And so that was always a thought of mine. But, if they had tried to do anything like that within the Episcopal Church, there would have been rebellion. So that wasn't going to work with us. But, you're on track as far as...
But even within Chick-fil-A, there are some restaurants that are the top 10%.
Yeah, agreed.
And others that are the bottom 10.
Right.
And studying the top 10 is really revelatory.
The notion of, I think the term is benchmarking, where, and that is a way to do it, is just what's working. And I will say that much of what the non-denominational world is doing is working, and doesn't mean we have to take the whole baby and the bathwater, all right? But there are some principles in there that are effective and that are important for people. And they also help, make disciples. And remember, you want disciples who make disciples who make disciples. Yes, sir.
The Charlie Kirk movement on college campuses is currently on fire.
Mm-hmm.
How long it will last, nobody knows. But
Right.
it is really.
And I think part of it, and this is just me, myself, and I, the three of us reflecting on that, is the Charlie Kirk movement on campus. How is the church, and I use that very broadly, very loosely, how is the church, helping to kind of gather that? And now we're back to what's our presence on college campuses. I know within the Episcopal Church, we've almost yielded the field. We've yielded the field on college campuses, the military chaplain corps, to others. And so I go back to my alma mater, Stetson University. When I was there, Stetson University, very strong Judeo-Christian foundation. Very strong, all right? They were affiliated with the Southern Baptist Convention. Over time, they did cut those ties with the Southern Baptist Convention, especially when the Southern Baptist Convention brought down loyalty oaths for all of the professors. Stetson, as well as others, said, okay. But over time, that Judeo-Christian foundation, nowhere in any of their official documents. So what's going on in college campuses, I honestly don't know, okay? My kids are, thanks be to God, are out of college, so. All right, you're going to be our final question or comment.
Oh, both, I guess.
Okay.
We're from the Midwest, the Bible Belt, but they said there are more Bibles being sold now than ever before.
Mm-hmm.
Charlie Kirk movement or what? We are members, we're very blessed, of the Mayflower Congregational Church in Michigan.
Okay.
And this church, which has brought out leadership skills and involvement because of the nature of this church. And so what I learned today was we have to be willing to give. And as Christ gave to us, we have to turn around and give to others and be active and read our Bibles and pray. Amen?
Amen. You should have done this presentation.
Thank you.
That is a good way to end, folks. And so, once again, thank you all for the opportunity to be here. This was always enjoyable research for me. It was always enjoyable teaching for me, as well as small group work. And so I appreciate the opportunity to put what I spent good 6 years, to use. I hope to good use with you all. I'll hang around for a while. Resources are over here. If you've got any more questions. And once again, John, thank you so much. I do appreciate it.
Take it over. That's all right. He had to go back to the bargain basket.
We have a teamwork approach.
Yeah.